A new client comes to therapy reporting his main problem is feeling detached from God. How would you proceed? That's a great question. And it's one that, though I might change some of the language in the way the question's framed, I know what he means. And you could probably say that some variant of this, it may not be the main problem, but some variant of being far from God is going to be in the lives of all of us at the points where we're in trouble in life. Here's how I'd come at this. How would you proceed? Right off the bat, first thing is there's a lot of other things I want to know. So I'm going to be inquiring. There's a number of questions, lines of conversation that I want to follow. For example, who is the God that the person feels far from? That is always extremely revealing. One of my commitments as a Christian is that God is self-defining. God says who God is. And many times a person feels far from a, quote, God that actually bears no relationship to the real God. And I would be a fool to start to try to say, well, here's 10 ways you might start to get closer to God, when the very God that they imagine inhabits the world is not the true one. So I want to know what I'm working with here. Who is the God? How do you understand him? Who is the God that you feel far from? Here's a second question, and equally important. What's happened in your life? Because the feelings that we have, feelings of being far from God, like any other feelings, don't just arise in a vacuum. They connect to things. Our lives are a fabric that is woven together and has 1,000 strings that interlink. So, for example, has something happened that has rattled your perception of who God is, of how you relate to him, of his kindness? I think, this kind of question, when I've encountered it, it often arises in the context of a person who's gone through some traumatic suffering. And the question then, how can God be loving towards me? How can his intentions for me be good when something so devastating, the death of a child, or being physically or sexually assaulted, or some great injustice that has happened. So a person can feel far from God, and it is exceedingly relevant what has happened to them. There are many psalms that the backdrop is the psalmist's profound sense that the Lord is gracious, he is compassionate, he's full of steadfast love and faithfulness, he has promised to bless me, and yet life seems very, very hard now. And people out to get me seem to have the upper hand. And Lord, where are you? So the experience of feeling far from God can actually be something that is woven into the very core, integral nature of what faith is. Faith in certain kinds of circumstances. A second possible answer, and there's more, but a second common answer of feeling far from God is sometimes gets... This one tends to draw the semi-gag line of who moved. Was it you or was it God that moved? But it has to do with when you've sinned. A person who has had some moral failure, who has their temper's been running out of control, they've been vegetating on television, they've committed adultery, used pornography, any kind of secret life. By definition, that person's going to feel far from God. And so that's a second aspect of the what happened question. And I'm not just making those two questions up out of thin air. It's profoundly woven into the structure of all of Scripture that we as human beings face two kinds of evils as broken people in a broken world. They're the evils that arise from within us, our sinfulness, and they're the evils that beset us from outside us, the hardships of being sinned against, bereavement, loss, suffering, pain, disability, and so forth. So it is those two great realities of broken human life, sin and suffering, that in which our relationship with God does play out. And so the question, the experience of feeling far from God is going to play out against those realities. And then the third question, in some ways is a subset of the previous one, but worth asking in its own right. If I feel detached from God, what is it that I am attached to? And part of what that's recognizing is that to feel far from God doesn't mean you're in a vacuum. It's not as though, well, I either have faith or I have a vacuum. I either have faith in the real God, or my life is absorbed, embedded, driven, seeking, preoccupied with something else. Now, it could be my pain, it could be my sinfulness, or my active pursuit of something sinful. But the human soul is not a vacuum, ever. The human soul is always, odd word we don't use much, it's always a plenum. It's always full of something. So what is that something that is currently preoccupying me that is not the one true and living God? And those questions go far and wide, and they will lead to knowing what do we do next.